The widow's fingers were bleeding through the holes of the worn cotton socks she was mending when the rancher first walked into her life, his boots heavy on the creaking floorboards of her tiny boarding house room in Winslow, Arizona territory. And she did not look up because pride was all she had left besides the needle in her hand. It was late autumn in 1881, and the desert winds had started carrying the promise of a cold winter. Anne Carson had been widowed for 8 months, ever since a mine collapse near Jerome took her husband Robert along with 17 other men who had gone down into the earth expecting wages and never came back up. She was 24 years old, and the world had become a place measured in pennies and stitches. The boarding house landlady, Mrs. Pritchard, had taken pity on her at first, letting her stay in the smallest room on the 3rd floor in exchange for laundry work and mending. But pity wore thin quickly, and now Anne paid what little she could by taking and mending from anyone in town who needed it. The knock on her door that November afternoon was firm but not aggressive. Anne set down the sock, wincing as the rough wool scraped against her raw fingertips, and opened the door just wide enough to see who stood there. The man was tall, perhaps in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like turquoise stones she had seen in the trading posts. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly by the brim, and there was something careful in the way he looked at her, as though she were a wild thing that might bolt if he moved too quickly. "Mrs. Carson." His voice was deep, roughened by years of calling across open ranges and giving orders to ranch hands. "Yes." She did not open the door wider. "My name is Henry Brennan. I own the Double B Ranch about 12 miles north of town. Mrs. Pritchard said you do mending work." Anne's stomach tightened. She needed every job she could get. "I do, Mr. Brennan. What do you need mended?" He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable, which seemed strange for a man of his size and obvious means. His clothing was well made, his boots expensive leather. "I have a whole bag of socks that need darning. My ranch hands go through them faster than I can keep up with. Mrs. Pritchard said you charge 2 cents a pair." 2 cents was barely anything, but it was what the market would bear. Most people in Winslow did their own mending or had wives and daughters to do it. Anne nodded. "That's right. I will pay you $1 a pair." The words hung in the air between them. Anne's hand tightened on the door frame. $1 a pair was absurd, 50 times what she charged. It was charity, and charity burned like acid in her throat. "I charge 2 cents, Mr. Brennan. That is my rate." His eyes met hers, and there was something in them she could not quite name. Not pity exactly, something else. Something that made her heart beat faster for reasons she did not want to examine. "I respect that, Mrs. Carson. But the fact is, my men are hard on socks. They need good, solid darning that will last through weeks of hard wear. I have had work done in town before, and it does not hold up. Mrs. Pritchard says your stitches are the finest she has ever seen. That kind of quality is worth paying for." It was a pretty lie, delivered with enough conviction that it almost sounded true. Anne wanted to close the door in his face, wanted to protect what little dignity she had left. But she also needed to eat. She had not had a proper meal in 3 days, just the thin soup Mrs. Pritchard sometimes left outside her door. 20 cents a pair, she heard herself say, and that is more than generous. Henry Brennan was quiet for a moment, studying her face. Then he nodded slowly. 20 cents it is. I have about 40 pairs that need work. Would that be acceptable? 40 pairs at 20 cents each was $8. $8 was more money than Anne had seen since Robert died. $8 was the difference between surviving the winter and not surviving it. "That would be acceptable," she said quietly. He smiled then, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines around his mouth and eyes. "I will bring them by tomorrow morning if that suits you." "Tomorrow morning is fine." He put his hat back on, tipping it to her. "Good day, Mrs. Carson." "Good day, Mr. Brennan." She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart hammering. Through the thin wood she heard his boots on the stairs, descending slowly. She moved to the window and watched him emerge onto the street below, walking to where a good sorrel horse was tied to the rail. He mounted with the easy grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle and rode away without looking back. Anne returned to her mending, but her hands were shaking too badly to make neat stitches. She set the work aside and sat on her narrow bed, staring at the wall. She did not believe for a moment that Henry Brennan's ranch hands went through 40 pairs of socks. She did not believe that he could not find adequate mending in town. What she did not know was why he had chosen this particular way to offer her help. That night, she dreamed of turquoise eyes and strong hands turning a hat brim, round and round like the wheel of fortune spinning her somewhere she could not yet see. True to his word, Henry Brennan arrived the next morning with a large canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Anne had been awake since dawn, having straightened her small room and herself as best she could. Her dress was faded calico, washed so many times the pattern had nearly disappeared, but it was clean and mended. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she had scrubbed her face until it was pink. When she opened the door to his knock, she found him studying the hallway as though seeing it for the first time. The boarding house was respectable but shabby, serving mostly single men who worked in the nearby mines or on the railroad. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet on the stairs was worn through in places. "Mr. Brennan," she said by way of greeting. "Mrs. Carson." He held up the bag. "I brought the socks. May I come in for a moment to discuss the work?" She hesitated. It was not entirely proper for a single woman to have a man in her room, even with the door open. But this was business, and she could not afford to be precious about propriety. "Of course." She stepped back, leaving the door wide open. He entered, and the small room seemed to shrink around his presence. He was not just tall but broad-shouldered, built like a man who worked alongside his ranch hands rather than simply directing them. He set the bag down on the single chair, which was the only furniture besides the bed and a small table she used for her mending work. "I appreciate you taking this on," he said, pulling open the bag. Inside were socks, dozens of them, in various states of disrepair. Some had holes worn through the heels or toes, others had thinning patches or tears. "As I said, my men are hard on their gear." Anne picked up one of the socks, examining it. The wool was good quality, better than most working men wore. The hole in the toe was genuine wear, not artificially created. She relaxed slightly. Perhaps he really did need the work done. "These will take me about 2 weeks," she said, assessing the pile. "Maybe 3 if I take on other jobs as well. Take the time you need, there is no rush." He paused, then added, "Would you be willing to do this on a regular basis? My men always need something mended. Socks, shirts, trousers. I would be happy to provide you with steady work if you are interested." Steady work. The words were like water in a desert. "I would be very interested in that, Mr. Brennan." "Good. Then let us say this. Every 2 weeks I will bring you a bag of mending. Whatever is in it, you work on it at 20 cents per item. How does that sound?" It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But Anne was in no position to question good fortune. "That sounds more than fair," he nodded, satisfied. "There is one more thing. I know Mrs. Pritchard serves supper to her boarders at 6 o'clock. The quality is—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic word. "Adequate," Anne supplied, because she had learned not to complain about charity, even when it came in the form of watery stew and hard bread. "I was going to say lacking," Henry said, and there was a hint of humor in his voice. "I would like to pay you for your work not just in cash but also in provisions if you are willing. I could bring you supplies from the ranch. Eggs, milk, butter, meat. Things that might make your situation more comfortable." And there it was. The charity she had been expecting, dressed up in the language of business. Anne felt her spine stiffen. "That will not be necessary, Mr. Brennan. Cash payment is sufficient." He turned to look at her directly, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "Mrs. Carson, I am not offering charity. I am offering payment in goods rather than coin. Many of the merchants in town extend me credit because I pay in produce from the ranch. It is a common practice. If you would prefer cash only, I will respect that. But I thought you might find it useful to have fresh supplies." It was still charity, but he was giving her a way to accept it without losing face. Anne's pride warred with her hunger, and hunger won. "I suppose that would be acceptable," she said slowly, "as part of the payment." "As part of the payment," he agreed. His smile was slight but warm. "I will bring the first delivery when I come to check on your progress in a few days." After he left, Anne spread the socks out on her bed and began to sort them by the type of repair they needed. Her mind was not on the work, though. It was on the rancher with the careful words and the too generous payments. Henry Brennan was not like the other men she had encountered in her months of widowhood. Those men had looked at her with either pity or speculation, seeing a woman alone as either an object of sympathy or an opportunity. Henry looked at her as though she were a person, whole and complete, worthy of respect. It made her deeply uncomfortable. She had learned to navigate the world as a widow by making herself small, insignificant, not worth noticing. Henry Brennan noticed her, and she did not know what to do with that attention. She picked up the first sock and threaded her needle. The work was familiar, soothing. Her hands knew what to do even when her mind was spinning. She would mend his socks, take his too generous payment, and maintain her distance. That was the only sensible course. 3 days later, Henry returned. Anne had made good progress on the socks, having worked late into the night by the light of her single candle. She had completed perhaps half of them, and her stitches were tiny and precise, each darn nearly invisible against the fabric. "Mrs. Carson," Henry said when she opened the door, "I brought those supplies we discussed." He had a wooden crate balanced on one hip. She could see eggs nestled in straw, a cloth-wrapped package that smelled of fresh bread, jars of what looked like preserved fruit and vegetables. Her mouth watered. "You can set it on the table," she said, standing aside. He entered and placed the crate down carefully. "My housekeeper made the bread this morning, and the jam is from last summer's peaches. The eggs and milk are from this morning as well." Anne stared at the crate. It was more food than she had seen in weeks. "This is too much, Mr. Brennan. It is partial payment for excellent work." He picked up one of the completed socks from the pile on her bed, examining her stitches. "This is remarkable, Mrs. Carson. I have never seen darning this fine. You could hardly tell it was mended at all." The praise made something in her chest tighten. Robert had been a good man, but he had never noticed things like stitches. He had been a miner, practical and focused on his work, and their marriage had been solid but not particularly romantic. They had been planning to start a family when the accident happened. Anne pushed the memory away. "Thank you," she said simply. Henry set the sock down. "I was wondering if you might be willing to do some additional work for me. My housekeeper is getting on in years, and she has trouble with close work like mending, but I have shirts and trousers that need attention as well. Would you be willing to take that on?" Of course. More work meant more money, more food, more security. "Good. I will bring them next time I am in town." He paused, then said, "Mrs. Carson, forgive me if I am overstepping, but have you thought about what you will do long term? Winslow is not an easy place for a woman alone." The question was too personal, too close to her own fears. "I will manage, Mr. Brennan. I have managed so far." "I do not doubt your strength," he said quietly, "but managing and thriving are not the same thing. If you ever need help, any kind of help, I would like you to know that you can ask me." Anne lifted her chin. "I am not in the habit of asking for help." "No," he agreed, his eyes warm. "I can see that, but the offer stands regardless." After he left, Anne sat down at the table and opened the cloth-wrapped bread. It was still slightly warm, golden brown and crusty. She broke off a piece and ate it slowly, savoring every bite. The jam was sweet and perfect, tasting of sunshine and summer days. She ate until her stomach was full for the first time in months, and then she cried, pressing her hands to her face to muffle the sound. She did not know what Henry Brennan wanted from her, but she knew that she could not afford to trust his kindness. Men did not help women without expecting something in return. That was the way of the world. She would take his money and his food because she had no choice, but she would guard her heart carefully. She had already lost everything once. She would not survive losing it all again. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Every few days, Henry would come to town with mending for Anne and supplies from the ranch. He never stayed long, never pushed for more than brief, polite conversation. But each visit left Anne feeling unsettled in ways she could not name. She learned things about him in small pieces. He had built his ranch from nothing over the course of 10 years, starting with a small herd of cattle and gradually expanding. He had never married, though she did not know why. His closest neighbor was nearly 20 miles away, and he employed 6 full-time ranch hands plus seasonal workers during cattle drives. He was well respected in the territory, known for being fair in his business dealings and generous to those who worked for him. In turn, he learned about her, though she volunteered little information. She had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a shopkeeper. She had met Robert when he came through town looking for workers to go west to the new mining operations in Arizona Territory. They had married quickly, both of them drawn by the promise of a fresh start. Robert had been a hard worker, sending money back to her parents in St. Louis when he could. The mine collapse had left her with nothing but debts and a boarding house room. December came, and with it, cold winds that rattled the windows of Anne's room. She had finished dozens of items for Henry now, and the steady income had allowed her to pay her rent in full and even buy fabric for a new dress. She told herself it was not vanity that made her choose a soft blue calico that matched her eyes. It was simply practical to have one good dress. She was working on a particularly difficult mend, trying to repair a shirt that had been torn on barbed wire, when she heard raised voices from the street below. She set down her work and went to the window, looking out to see a small crowd gathering near the general store. Mrs. Pritchard knocked on her door a few moments later, breathless with news. "Did you hear? There was a robbery on the road from Flagstaff. 3 men held up a freight wagon. They shot the driver, poor man. Sheriff is putting together a posse to go after them." Anne felt cold. The road from Flagstaff was the same road Henry would take when he returned to his ranch. When did this happen? This morning early. The driver managed to make it back to town before he died. Said the robbers headed southeast toward the ranching country, toward the Double B Ranch. Anne spent the rest of the day in an agony of worry that she refused to acknowledge. She told herself she was concerned only because Henry was her employer, because she needed the income he provided. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the careful courtesy he showed her. or the way his presence made her small room feel less lonely. When he knocked on her door the next afternoon, whole and healthy, she opened it and felt her knees go weak with relief. "Mrs. Carson," he said, then stopped, studying her face. "What is wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I heard about the robbery. I was concerned that you might have been on the road." His expression softened. "I was at the ranch all yesterday and this morning. I am perfectly safe." "Good," she said, and then felt foolish for how much she meant it. He entered at her invitation, setting down his usual bag of mending. But this time he also carried a wrapped package that he held out to her. "I brought you something. It is nearly Christmas and I thought you might find this useful." Anne took the package hesitantly. "Mr. Brennan, you already pay me generously. You do not need to give me gifts." "Open it," he said simply. She unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful wool shawl in deep green, far finer than anything she owned. The wool was soft and thick, clearly expensive. She looked up at him, torn between gratitude and discomfort. "I cannot accept this." "Why not?" "It is too fine, too personal." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mrs. Carson, I am going to be honest with you, and I hope you will not take offense. I know your situation is difficult. I know you have pride, and I respect that deeply. But I also know that your room is cold, and that thin shawl you wear is not enough to keep you warm. This is not charity. This is one human being looking out for another. If our situations were reversed, I believe you would do the same for me." Would she? Anne looked down at the shawl, running her fingers over the soft wool. Yes, she realized. If she had the means and saw someone in need, she would help them. It was pride that made her want to refuse, nothing more. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is beautiful." "It suits you," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. Their eyes met, and the air in the small room seemed to thicken. Anne saw something in Henry's face that she had been trying not to see for weeks now. Interest, affection, perhaps even the beginning of something deeper. She took a step back, clutching the shawl to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Brennan, I cannot." "I know," he said quietly. "You are still in mourning. You are not ready. I understand that, Anne. I am not asking for anything. I am only offering friendship and help and as much time as you need." The use of her first name sent a shiver through her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Henry was silent for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "The first time I saw you, standing in that doorway with blood on your fingers from the mending you were doing, holding yourself with so much dignity despite everything you had lost, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. I have seen men break under far less than what you have endured. But you do not break. You bend, you adapt, you survive. I admire that more than I can say." Anne felt tears prick her eyes. "I am not brave, Mr. Brennan. I am simply doing what I must to survive." "That is what bravery is," he said gently. "Doing what must be done, even when it is hard. Even when you are afraid." She did not know what to say to that. She folded the shawl carefully and set it on her bed, then turned back to him. "I should get back to work." He understood the dismissal for what it was. "Of course. I will see you in a few days, Mrs. Carson." After he left, Anne put on the shawl and stood in front of her small, cracked mirror. The green brought out the color in her eyes and made her pale skin look less sallow. She looked, for the first time in months, almost pretty. She touched her reflection, tracing the line of her jaw, and wondered what Henry saw when he looked at her. Then she took off the shawl and folded it away. She could not afford to think about such things. She was a widow with nothing to offer a man like Henry Brennan. He owned a ranch, had money and status. She lived in a boarding house room and mended socks for pennies. The gap between them was too wide to bridge, no matter how kind he was or how her heart sped up when he smiled at her. Christmas came and went quietly. Mrs. Pritchard put up a small pine tree in the boarding house parlor and served a better supper than usual on Christmas Eve. Anne ate alone in her room, as she did most nights, and tried not to think about the Christmas before when Robert had been alive, and they had talked about the children they hoped to have. The day after Christmas, Henry appeared at her door with his usual bag of mending and an invitation that took her completely by surprise. "The town is having a New Year's dance at the community hall," he said, turning his hat in his hands in that familiar gesture. "I would be honored if you would attend with me." Anne's first instinct was to refuse. She was still in mourning, even if the formal year had not yet passed. Going to a dance would be improper. People would talk. But she was also desperately lonely, and the thought of spending New Year's Eve alone in her small room made something in her chest ache. "I do not have anything appropriate to wear," she said, which was not a refusal but not quite an acceptance either. "The dress you are wearing would be perfect," Henry said. "The blue calico, the one she had made weeks ago. You look beautiful in blue." The compliment made her flush. "Mr. Brennan." "Henry," he said softly. "After all these weeks, I think you could call me Henry. If you are comfortable with that." "Henry," she tried, and the name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. "I do not know if it would be appropriate. People will talk." "People already talk," he said pragmatically. "I have been coming to visit you regularly for weeks. Half the town probably thinks we are courting already. We might as well enjoy ourselves." She could not help but smile at that. "You make a compelling argument." "Is that a yes?" Anne thought about another year beginning, another year of loneliness and struggle. She thought about Henry's kindness, his patience, the way he treated her like someone who mattered. Maybe it was too soon. Maybe people would talk. But maybe, just maybe, she deserved one evening of happiness. "Yes," she said. "I would like to go to the dance with you." His face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. "I will call for you at 7 o'clock on New Year's Eve." After he left, Anne sat down on her bed and pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling them burn. She was going to a dance with Henry. It felt terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Anne took the blue calico dress apart and remade it, adding small touches of lace she had been saving. She washed her hair with the last of her good soap and practiced pinning it up in different styles. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that it was just one dance, that it meant nothing. But it did mean something. It meant she was choosing to live again, to allow the possibility of happiness back into her life. It meant she was brave enough to risk her heart, even though she knew how devastating loss could be. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. Anne dressed carefully, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons on her remade dress. She pinned her hair up, leaving a few curls loose around her face. She put on the green shawl Henry had given her. When she looked in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. She looked young again, hopeful, almost pretty. Henry arrived precisely at 7, dressed in a dark suit she had never seen him wear before. He looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable, as though he was more used to ranch clothes than formal attire. When she opened the door, he stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "Anne," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she said, trying to calm her racing heart. "You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through the fabric of his coat. They walked down the stairs together, and Anne could feel the curious eyes of the other boarders watching them go. Let them watch, she thought. For once in her life, she was going to do something just because it made her happy. The community hall was decorated with pine boughs and paper streamers, and a small band played in the corner. The room was full of people Anne recognized from town, all dressed in their best clothes. She saw the stairs when she entered on Henry's arm, saw the whispers passed behind hands. She lifted her chin and ignored them all. "Would you like something to drink?" Henry asked, ever attentive. "Please." He returned with 2 cups of punch, and they stood together at the edge of the dance floor, watching the other couples swirl past. Anne recognized the mayor and his wife, the owner of the general store dancing with his daughter, several ranch families she knew by sight. "I should warn you," Henry said, leaning close so she could hear him over the music. "I am not the best dancer. I learned the basics years ago, but I do not get much practice on the ranch." "I am not much better," Anne admitted. "Robert and I only went to a handful of dances." The mention of her late husband created a brief silence between them. Then Henry set down his cup and offered her his hand. "Will you dance with me anyway?" Anne set down her own cup and placed her hand in his. "Yes." He led her onto the floor just as the band struck up a waltz. Henry placed one hand at her waist, and she rested her hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric. They began to move, and if their steps were not perfectly synchronized, if they stumbled occasionally, it did not matter. Anne felt like she was floating, held safe in Henry's arms, moving to music that seemed to play just for them. "You are doing fine," Henry murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "So are you." They danced through one song and then another. Other couples moved around them, but Anne was aware only of Henry, of his hand at her waist, of his eyes watching her face. The world narrowed to just the 2 of them, and for the first time in months, Anne felt something other than grief and fear. She felt alive. When the music paused and the band took a break, Henry led her outside to the porch where the air was cold and clean. The stars overhead were brilliant, unpolluted by city lights, and Anne could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a river of light. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," Henry said, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Thank you for asking me." Anne pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, though she was not really cold. Henry was standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Anne," he said, then paused. "May I be honest with you?" Her heart began to beat faster. "Of course. I care about you. I have cared about you from the first moment I saw you, standing in that doorway with so much strength and dignity despite everything you had lost. These past weeks, getting to know you, have been the best part of my days. I know it is too soon. I know you are not ready, but I need you to know that when you are ready, if you are ever ready, I am here. I am not going anywhere." Anne's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him that she cared too, that every time he left her room she felt the loss of his presence like a physical ache. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by fear and guilt and the lingering shadow of her grief. "Henry," she managed, "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I am not asking for a response. I just needed you to know." He looked down at his hands, then back at her face. "But I also need to tell you something else. I will be leaving for Prescott the day after tomorrow. There is a Territorial Cattlemen's Association meeting, and I need to be there. I will be gone for about 2 weeks. 2 weeks without seeing him, without the brief visits that had become the highlights of her days." Anne felt the loss even before he left. "I see. I will leave you plenty of mending to work on while I am gone, and supplies as well. My foreman will stop by once to check on you and bring anything you need." "That is very thoughtful." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Henry did something that surprised her. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in both of his. "I will miss you, Anne." She looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, her small and pale against his skin. "I will miss you too," she whispered, and it was the truest thing she had said in a long time. They went back inside for more dancing, and when the clock struck midnight and the new year began, Henry kissed her hand gently, properly, and wished her a happy 1882. Anne held that moment close to her heart, a bright point of light in what had been such a dark year. Henry walked her back to the boarding house after the dance ended, his arm steady under hers as they navigated the dark streets. At her door, he paused. "Happy New Year, Anne." "Happy New Year, Henry." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but instead he just tipped his hat to her and left, his boots echoing in the stairwell. Anne went into her room and closed the door, leaning against it as she pressed her hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding, her mind spinning. She was falling in love with Henry Brennan, and the realization terrified her. The next day, Henry came by with supplies and mending as promised. This time, there were several shirts that needed buttons replaced and tiers mended, as well as 2 pairs of trousers with worn knees. Anne spread the work out on her bed, already planning the repairs. "This should keep you busy while I am gone," Henry said, his voice carefully neutral. "I will have everything ready for you when you return." He nodded, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather purse. "This is payment in advance for the work, plus a little extra for supplies you might need while I am away." Anne opened the purse and stared. There were several gold coins inside, far more than the work warranted. "Henry, this is too much." "It is what your work is worth," he said firmly. "Do not argue with me, Anne, please." She could see the determination in his eyes and knew that pressing the point would hurt him. "Thank you," she said instead. "You are welcome." He hesitated, then said, "If you need anything while I am gone, anything at all, send word to the ranch. My foreman, Jack Mitchell, knows to look after you. I will be fine. I know you will, but I will feel better knowing you can reach out if necessary." He picked up his hat from where he had set it on her table. "I should go. I need to finish preparations for the trip. Travel safely." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Anne, I meant what I said last night. Every word." Then he was gone, and Anne was left alone with a pile of mending, a purse full of gold coins, and a heart that felt fuller than it had in nearly a year. The 2 weeks Henry was gone felt longer than all the months since Robert's death combined. Anne threw herself into the mending work, making her stitches as perfect as she could manage. She took walks through town during the brief, warm parts of the day, bundled in her green shawl. She wrote a letter to her parents in St. Louis, the first communication she had sent in months, telling them she was well and had found steady work. She also thought about Henry constantly, wondering where he was, if the journey had been safe, when he would return. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that caring so much after such a short time was absurd. But her heart did not listen to logic. Jack Mitchell, the foreman from the Double B Ranch, stopped by on the 5th day of Henry's absence. He was a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Boss asked me to check on you," he said without preamble. "Make sure you have everything you need." "I am doing well, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Jack is fine." He looked around her small room, his expression neutral, but Anne thought she saw sympathy in his eyes. "Boss is a good man. Best I have ever worked for. Treats his people right, always fair. Never asks us to do anything he would not do himself." Anne was not sure what to say to that. "He has been very kind to me." "He is fond of you," Jack said bluntly. "I have known him for 8 years, and I have never seen him act the way he does around you. Just thought you should know that." After Jack left, Anne sat with his words. Henry was fond of her. She was fond of him too, more than fond if she was honest with herself. But what did that mean for her future? She was still a widow, still poor, still living in a boarding house room. Henry was a successful rancher with land and money and status. What could she possibly offer him? The answer came to her slowly over the next few days. She could offer him herself, her heart, her loyalty, her love. If those things were enough, then perhaps she did not need to offer anything else. Henry returned on a cold afternoon in the middle of January. Anne was working on the last of the mending when she heard his familiar knock. She opened the door and felt her entire being light up at the sight of him. "Henry," she said, and could not keep the joy from her voice. "You are back. I am back." He looked tired, dusty from travel, but his eyes were warm as they met hers. "May I come in?" "Of course." He entered and set down his hat, then turned to her. "I missed you, Anne. Every day I was gone I thought about you, about coming back to you." Anne's heart was pounding so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. "I missed you too. The days felt very long." "Did they?" He took a step closer to her. "Anne, I need to tell you something. While I was in Prescott, I had a lot of time to think about my life, about what I want for my future. And I realized that what I want is you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to share my days with you, my home with you, my life with you." "Henry," she whispered, afraid to hope. "I know it has not been long. I know you are still grieving. But I also know what I feel, and I feel it with absolute certainty. I love you, Anne Carson. I think I have loved you from the moment I first saw you. And I am asking you, if you think you could ever feel the same way, if you think you could ever see a future with me, to give me the chance to prove that I can make you happy." Anne felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I loved Robert, and when he died, it nearly destroyed me. I am afraid to love like that again, afraid to risk that kind of loss." Henry reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "I know, sweetheart, I know you are afraid, but love is always a risk. There are no guarantees in life. All I can promise you is that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, to make you happy, to be worthy of your trust. And I will wait as long as you need. Months, years if necessary. I am a patient man, Anne, and you are worth waiting for." She looked up into his face, seeing the truth written there. He loved her. This strong, kind, generous man loved her, and she loved him too, she realized. She had been falling in love with him gradually over the past months, so slowly she had not recognized it until this moment. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking. "I love you, and it terrifies me, but I love you." Henry's face broke into a smile so bright it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Say it again." "I love you, Henry Brennan." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she clung to him, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth and strength and safety of his embrace. He kissed her forehead, her temple, her cheek, soft, reverent kisses that made her feel precious. "Marry me," he said against her hair. "I know it is fast, I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me, Anne, let me take care of you, let me love you for the rest of our lives." Anne pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Are you sure? I have nothing to bring to a marriage. No money, no property, no family connections. You bring yourself, and that is everything I want." His hands cupped her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "You are strong and brave and kind. You work harder than anyone I know. You have survived loss that would have broken most people. You are exactly the woman I want by my side, as my partner, as my wife." She thought about her small room, about the endless mending, about the loneliness that had filled her days. She thought about Henry's ranch, about building a life together, about the possibility of children and grandchildren, and a future that held more than just survival. "Yes," she said, the word coming from somewhere deep inside her. "Yes, I will marry you." Henry kissed her then, properly, his lips soft and warm on hers. It was Anne's first kiss since Robert died, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. She kissed him back, pouring all of her hope and fear and love into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Henry rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. "I am going to make you happy, Anne. I swear I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," she said, and meant it. They talked for hours that afternoon, making plans. They would marry as soon as arrangements could be made, perhaps in 2 weeks. Anne would move to the ranch. They would have a small wedding, just a few close friends and the ranch hands. Henry wanted to do things properly, respectfully, to show the town that this was a real marriage built on love and respect. "I need to give Mrs. Pritchard notice," Anne said, looking around her small room, "and pack my things. Not that I have much to pack." "We can buy anything you need," Henry assured her. "Furniture, clothes, whatever you want to make the ranch house feel like home. I do not need much, just you." He kissed her again, soft and sweet. "You have me, sweetheart. For the rest of my life you have me." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Anne sewed herself a new dress for the wedding, a simple but elegant gown in ivory cotton. Henry arranged for the local minister to perform the ceremony at the ranch, under the cottonwood trees near the house. He sent Jack into town with a wagon to help Anne move her few belongings. The other boarders were shocked by the news, as was Mrs. Pritchard, but Anne did not care. She held her head high and accepted their awkward congratulations with grace. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth of her relationship with Henry, knew that it was built on genuine affection and respect. Her parents sent a telegram in response to her letter, saying they were happy for her and hoped to visit in the spring. The brief message made Anne's eyes water. She had felt so alone for so long, and now suddenly she had a future full of people who cared about her. The day before the wedding, Anne gave Mrs. Pritchard her final rent payment and said goodbye to the small room that had been her home for the past months. It felt strange to leave, like closing a chapter of her life. She had been so unhappy here, but she had also survived here. This room represented her strength, her ability to endure. "Thank you," she told Mrs. Pritchard, "for giving me a place to stay when I had nowhere else to go." The older woman's face softened. "You are a good girl, Anne. That rancher is lucky to have you. I hope you will be very happy." "I think I will be." Jack drove her out to the ranch in the wagon, her trunk of belongings packed carefully in the back. The journey took about an hour, following the road north out of Winslow, and then turning onto a smaller trail that wound through the desert landscape. Anne watched the scenery change from the dusty browns of town to the wild beauty of open land, with scattered juniper trees and distant mesas rising against the sky. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small hill. It was larger than Anne had expected, a sprawling single-story structure built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. There were several outbuildings, including a large barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various sheds and corrals. Cattle dotted the landscape in the distance, and she could see horses in a nearby paddock. Henry came out of the house as the wagon pulled up, and his face broke into a smile when he saw her. He helped her down from the wagon seat, his hands warm on her waist. "Welcome home," he said, and the words made something in Anne's chest expand. "It is beautiful," she said, looking around. "I did not imagine it would be so big. Come inside. I want to show you everything." The house was cool inside, with thick walls that kept out the desert heat in summer and the cold in winter. The main room was large and comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful woven rugs on the floor. There was a stone fireplace at one end, and large windows that let in plenty of light. Henry led her through the house, showing her the kitchen, the dining room, the several bedrooms. "This will be our room," he said, opening the door to the largest bedroom. It had a big bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and windows that looked out over the ranch. "I hope you like it." "It is perfect," Anne said, and meant it. The room was simple but comfortable, and it was more space than she had had to herself in months. Henry's housekeeper, a Mexican woman named Rosa who was probably in her 60s, came to meet Anne. She had a warm smile and kind eyes, and she welcomed Anne in heavily accented English. "I am so happy the boss finally finds a good woman," Rosa said, patting Anne's hand. "He needs someone to take care of. He is too lonely out here by himself." That evening, Anne and Henry sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the desert. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid they did not seem real. Henry held her hand, and Anne leaned against his shoulder, feeling more at peace than she had in a long time. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Henry asked. "A little," Anne admitted. "It is happening so fast. We can wait if you want. I do not want to rush you." She squeezed his hand. "No, I do not want to wait. I want to start our life together. I am just nervous because I want it to be perfect." "It will be perfect because we will be together." He kissed the top of her head. "That is all that matters." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Anne thought about the journey that had brought her here, from grief and poverty to this moment, sitting beside a man who loved her on the porch of a home that would soon be hers. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of sorrow but also full of unexpected joy. The wedding day dawned clear and cool. Anne woke early in the guest bedroom where she had slept, her heart fluttering with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Rosa helped her dress, pinning up her hair and adjusting the fall of her new ivory gown. "You look beautiful," Rosa said, her eyes misty. "The boss will be so happy." The ceremony was held outside under the cottonwood trees as planned. A small group had gathered. Jack and the other ranch hands, Rosa, the minister, a few neighboring ranchers and their wives whom Henry had invited. Anne walked out to meet Henry without anyone to give her away, her head held high, her heart full. Henry stood waiting for her under the trees, dressed in a new dark suit, his hair neatly combed. When he saw her, his expression transformed into something so tender it made her want to cry. She went to him and took his hands, and the minister began the ceremony. The words washed over Anne in a blur. She was aware of Henry's hands holding hers, of his voice deep and steady as he repeated his vows, of her own voice somehow remaining calm as she promised to love and honor him for the rest of her days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and told Henry he could kiss his bride, Henry cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with such gentle reverence that Anne felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Hello, Mrs. Brennan," Henry whispered against her lips. "Hello, husband," she whispered back. They celebrated with a simple meal that Rosa had prepared, eating at a long table set up outside. The ranch hands were respectful but friendly, congratulating Henry and welcoming Anne. The neighboring ranchers' wives offered their good wishes and invited Anne to join them for a quilting circle that met monthly. Anne accepted gratefully, touched by their kindness. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, and Anne and Henry were left alone. Henry led her inside and into their bedroom, closing the door gently behind them. Anne's heart was pounding, suddenly nervous. She had been married before, but this felt different. This felt more significant somehow. "We do not have to do anything tonight if you are not ready," Henry said, reading her expression correctly. "I am happy just to hold you." "I want this," Anne said, reaching for him. "I want you. I am just a little nervous." "So am I," he admitted, which surprised her. "I want to make you happy, Anne. I want to be a good husband to you." "You already are," she said, and pulled him down into a kiss. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with gentle touches and whispered words. Henry was patient and considerate, making sure Anne felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Anne's head on Henry's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Are you happy?" Henry asked, his fingers stroking through her hair. "So happy," Anne murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again." "Good," he said, kissing her forehead. "That is all I want, to keep you happy and safe and loved." Anne fell asleep in her husband's arms, in her new home, in her new life. The grief she had carried for so long was still there, a quiet sorrow for the husband she had lost. But it no longer defined her. She was more than her loss, more than her pain. She was Henry's wife, a rancher's wife, a woman beginning again, and that was enough. The months that followed were a time of adjustment and joy. Anne settled into life at the Double B Ranch, learning the rhythms of ranch work and finding her place in the household. She took over some of the household management from Rosa, who was grateful to have help. She learned to cook for ranch hands, to manage supplies, to keep accounts. Henry taught her to ride, patient as she learned to control her horse, celebrating her progress with kisses and praise. The ranch hands accepted her presence easily. She mended their clothes, tended to them when they were sick, and treated them with respect and kindness. In return, they were protective of her, respectful, often going out of their way to help her with tasks they knew were difficult. Spring came to the Arizona Territory in a riot of wildflowers and green growth. Anne discovered that she loved the ranch, loved the wide open spaces and the big sky and the sense of freedom. She had spent so much of her life in cities or towns, and the ranch felt like a revelation, a place where she could breathe deeply and be herself. Henry was everything a husband should be: kind, attentive, loving, and passionate. He showed his love in countless small ways, bringing her wildflowers from the range, fixing things in the house before she even asked, sitting with her in the evenings and talking about their days. At night, they came together with desire and tenderness, learning each other's needs and preferences, building a physical intimacy that matched their emotional connection. In late spring, Anne realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure, barely daring to hope, before telling Henry. They were sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sunset as had become their habit, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby," she said softly. Henry's head whipped around to stare at her. "Are you sure?" "I think so. I have missed my courses for 2 months now, and I have been feeling a little sick in the mornings." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming into pure joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "Anne, you have made me the happiest man alive." She laughed, tears streaming down her face. "I am so happy, Henry. I did not think I would ever have children. After Robert died, I thought that dream died with him." "You are going to be such a good mother," Henry said, cupping her face in his hands. "Our child is so lucky to have you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Anne's belly grew round and full, and Henry was constantly amazed by the changes in her body, placing his hands on her stomach to feel the baby move, talking to their child through her skin. He was protective almost to the point of being ridiculous, not wanting her to lift anything heavy or exert herself too much. Anne bore his fussing with patient amusement, understanding it came from love. Rosa was thrilled about the baby, already knitting tiny blankets and clothes. The neighboring ranch wives brought baby things they had saved from their own children and shared advice about pregnancy and childbirth. Anne felt surrounded by support and love, so different from the lonely months after Robert's death. Her parents wrote that they would come to visit after the baby was born, wanting to meet their new son-in-law and grandchild. Anne looked forward to seeing them, to showing them her new life and how happy she had become. In late October, as the weather turned cool again, Anne went into labor. Henry rode hard to fetch the midwife from town, then spent the long hours of labor pacing and worrying while Rosa and the midwife tended to Anne. When his son's first cry rang out, Henry burst into the bedroom to find Anne exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "A boy," Anne said, her voice tired but full of joy. "We have a son, Henry." Henry approached slowly, awed by the tiny person his wife held. The baby had a fuzz of dark hair and was wailing lustily, his small face red with effort. When Anne placed him in Henry's arms, the baby quieted, blinking up at his father with unfocused eyes. "Hello, little one," Henry whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am your papa, and I promise I am going to do everything I can to keep you and your mama safe and happy." They named him Thomas Robert Brennan, Thomas for Henry's father and Robert in memory of Anne's first husband. Henry suggested the middle name himself, understanding that honoring Anne's past did not diminish their present. Anne cried when he made the suggestion, loving him even more for his thoughtfulness. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. He had his father's blue-green eyes and what appeared to be his mother's delicate features. Henry was besotted, spending hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. Anne loved watching her husband with their child, seeing the gentleness and care he brought to fatherhood. The first year of Thomas's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and countless small joys. Anne learned to be a mother, drawing on instinct and the advice of more experienced women. Henry was a hands-on father, not afraid to change diapers or walk the floor with a crying baby. They worked together as a team, supporting each other through the challenges of new parenthood. Anne's parents visited in the spring of 1883, meeting Henry and Thomas for the first time. Her mother cried when she saw how happy Anne was, how well she looked. Her father shook Henry's hand and thanked him for taking such good care of his daughter. The visit lasted 2 weeks, and by the end, Anne's parents were already talking about returning the following year. Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. The cattle business was good, providing a solid income. Henry expanded the herd and hired additional ranch hands. Anne managed the household with Rosa's help, raising Thomas and slowly working on improvements to the house. She planted a garden near the house, growing vegetables and flowers. She started a small flock of chickens, providing fresh eggs for the household. In the evenings after Thomas was asleep, Anne and Henry would sit on the porch as they always had, watching the sun set and talking about their day. These quiet moments together remained precious to them, a time to connect and simply be together. "You remember the first time I came to your room in the boarding house?" Henry asked one evening, his arm around Anne as she leaned against his shoulder. "Of course. You wanted me to mend your socks." "I did not really need the socks mended," Henry admitted. "I mean, they did need work, but I could have had it done anywhere. I saw you one day in town, walking with your head held high despite the worn dress and the sadness in your eyes. I asked Mrs. Pritchard about you, and she told me your story. I wanted to help you, but I knew you would never accept charity, so I invented a reason to hire you." Anne sat up to look at him. "I suspected as much. No one needs 40 pairs of socks mended at once." Henry laughed. "No, they do not. But it gave me an excuse to see you, to get to know you. And the more I saw you, the more I fell in love with you." "I fell in love with you too," Anne said softly. "Even though I tried not to, even though I was afraid, you were patient with me, kind to me. You made me believe I could be happy again. You made me complete," Henry said, cupping her face to kiss her. "I had a good life before you, but it was missing something essential. You and Thomas, you are what make everything meaningful." 2 years later, Anne gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Anne Brennan. She had her mother's dark hair and delicate features, and she was as strong-willed as her brother had been placid. Henry was just as besotted with his daughter as he had been with his son, cradling her tiny body and promising to protect her always. Thomas, now 3 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, talking to her in his childish voice, bringing her toys and blankets. Anne's heart swelled watching her children together, seeing the family she and Henry were building. The years passed in a blur of happiness. There were challenges, of course. A drought one year that tested their resources. A winter storm that killed some of their cattle. The normal illnesses and accidents that came with ranch life. But through it all, Anne and Henry faced everything together, their love and partnership only growing stronger. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around the ranch, learning everything he could about cattle and horses. Sarah was spirited and fearless, often giving her parents heart attacks with her adventurous nature. In 1887, Anne gave birth to another son, James Henry Brennan, who had his father's dark hair and his mother's gentle nature. The ranch prospered. Henry's fair dealing and good business sense earned him respect throughout the territory. The Double B Ranch became known as one of the most successful operations in northern Arizona. Henry hired more hands, expanded the grazing range, and built additional structures. Anne managed the growing household with efficiency and grace, earning the respect and affection of everyone who worked for them. When Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, Anne and Henry celebrated with their 3 grown children and their families. Thomas had married a local rancher's daughter and was managing a section of the Double B. Sarah had married a lawyer in Flagstaff and had given Anne and Henry 4 grandchildren. James was still unmarried, working as foreman on the ranch and apparently in no hurry to settle down. Anne was 55 years old now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with age and sun. But she was still beautiful to Henry, who at 63 was also showing his years but remained strong and capable. They sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset as they had done for 30 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren. "You ever think about that boarding house room?" Henry asked, his arm around Anne's shoulders. "Sometimes," Anne admitted. "It feels like another lifetime. Like it happened to a different person." "In a way it did. You were so sad then, so alone. Look at you now, surrounded by family with a home and a life." Anne looked around at her family, at the ranch that had become her home, at the man who had saved her from despair and shown her it was possible to love again. "I was mending socks for Pennies," she said softly, "and you paid me in gold and devotion." Henry smiled and kissed her forehead. "Best investment I ever made." Their grandchildren were running around the yard, their laughter ringing out in the evening air. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and gold, painting the desert in warm light. Anne leaned against her husband, feeling the solid warmth of him, and thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments of joy and challenge and love. She thought about Robert sometimes, with fondness and gratitude for the time they had had. But her life with Henry had taught her that the heart was big enough for multiple loves, that honoring the past did not mean being trapped by it. She had survived loss and poverty and grief, and she had come out the other side stronger and happier than she could have imagined. "I love you," she told Henry, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," he replied, squeezing her close. "Today, tomorrow, and always." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Anne and Henry sat together in the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, living the life they had chosen together. It had started with mending socks in a boarding house room, but it had become something far greater, a love story for the ages, a testament to hope and second chances, and the healing power of devotion. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Anne and Henry watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated the birth of great-grandchildren, and mourned the loss of friends and family members who passed on. Through it all, their love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. In 1920, as they approached their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Thomas and his wife had 5 children now, all involved in ranching. Sarah and her lawyer husband had moved back to Winslow, where he had opened a successful practice, and they had 7 grandchildren between their 4 children. James had finally married at age 35, choosing a schoolteacher from Flagstaff, and they had 2 young daughters. The ranch house had been expanded over the years to accommodate family gatherings. There was now a large addition with a dining room that could seat 20 people comfortably. The original bedroom Anne and Henry shared had been renovated but kept essentially the same, with the same windows looking out over the ranch. On the evening of their anniversary, after a day of celebration with food and music and laughter, Anne and Henry slipped away to their room. They were both old now, Henry at 71 and Anne at 63, their bodies marked by age and hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been on their wedding day, young and hopeful and deeply in love. 40 years, Anne marveled, sitting on the bed they had shared for so long. It does not feel like it has been that long. Time flies when you are happy, Henry said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but they were still strong, still capable of holding hers. "You have any regrets?" Anne asked, looking into his face. "Not a single one," Henry said without hesitation. "Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life came from that choice." "I feel the same way," Anne said softly. "You saved me, Henry, not just from poverty, though you did that too. You saved me from despair, from loneliness, from the belief that I could never be happy again. You showed me what real love looks like." Henry cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle as it had been 40 years ago. "You saved me too, Anne. I was lonely before you, even if I did not realize it. I had a successful ranch, but no one to share it with. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. You made my life complete." They kissed then, a sweet, lingering kiss that held 4 decades of love and partnership and shared life. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. "Here is to 40 more years," Anne said, smiling through her tears. "At least 40 more," Henry agreed, pulling her close. They did not get 40 more years. In 1924, Henry suffered a heart attack while working on the ranch. He died in Anne's arms, his last words a whispered "I love you" that she would carry with her for the rest of her days. He was 75 years old. Anne mourned him deeply, but not with the desperate despair that had marked Robert's death. She had been young then, unprepared for loss. Now she was older, and while the grief was profound, it was tempered by gratitude for the 43 years they had shared. She knew how lucky she had been to love and be loved so completely. She continued living at the ranch, which Thomas now managed. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love and support. She spent her days working in her garden, mending clothes for her family, and holding her great-grandchildren. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, remembering the countless evenings she had spent there with Henry. Anne lived another 12 years after Henry's death, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1936 at the age of 79. She was buried beside Henry on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the cottonwood trees where they had been married. Their headstone was simple: Henry and Anne Brennan, beloved husband and wife, together forever. Their descendants continued to run the Double B Ranch for generations, passing down the stories of how it all began. The story of the widow mending socks for pennies, and the rancher who paid her in gold and devotion. The story of a love that survived grief and poverty and time itself, that built a family and a legacy that would last for generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the Arizona desert in shades of orange and gold, people say you can still see them there on the porch of the old ranch house, sitting together and watching the sky, forever young, forever in love, forever home.